It is a brand new edition. Welcome to the month of July. It is also free agency day, new league year. Flyers Daily presented by Ticketmaster. Make more memories live. We have a ton to discuss, from RFAs getting qualified to obviously the draft, and free agency lies ahead. And joining us as he does every Monday from PhiladelphiaFlyers.com, NHL.com, and HockeyBuzz.com, it is Bill Meltzer. While the offseason's been underway for a little while for Flyers and Flyer fans, this is the grind. This is the busy time of the offseason, coming off the draft right into free agency.
Yeah, that whole whirlwind of activity, right? The draft, development camp, the announcement of the World Junior Summer Showcase rosters that comes a little bit after the end of camp. And then you hit the dog days of summer where it goes quiet again until close to camp. So, particularly because there's the free agent news league wide the first week or so, which drifts off each day after the first. So, this is really in a lot of ways the heart of the off season once the draft is over.
Yeah, you have a few straggler free agents that haven't signed that maybe will sign, a week or two from now. But basically, the glut of it happens very quickly. They say no tampering, but it's amazing that right after free agency opens, deal after deal gets announced. Complicated deals, too.
It is amazing, right? Yes, these 6 to 8 year deals all just fall into place like that. It's amazing.
The NFL called something a legal tampering period. That's, first of all, a contradiction. But they have their legal tampering period before free agency opens. Bill, let's get to before we even get to the draft, let's get to the fact that the Flyers did not qualify 3 restricted free agents. They had to do that. They qualified Bobby Brink and Yegor Zamula. They did not qualify Mason Millman, Will Zmolik, and Carter Hart. So the Carter Hart era is over officially in Philadelphia. He will become an unrestricted free agent. Any surprises here to you?
No surprises with Millman or Zmolik. Mason was a draft pick who really didn't develop. In a way, his development was a little bit fairly or unfairly, casualty of COVID, because he was still junior eligible at the time. He was in the AHL. Really, no playing time for him. He wasn't ready yet. And then he never really quite got on track the way that was hoped. And maybe he wouldn't have made it anyway, but it felt like he never really got his development on track after that. Zmolik, I don't think it was ever a real serious consideration, to qualify. Minor league guy. The real decision here was with Carter Hart. And when you weigh all the factors involved, Carter Hart in his career, until all the legal issues came up, was an above-average NHL goalie. Always kind of knocking on the door of taking that next step into the top echelon. Not really reaching that on a consistent basis yet. But if not for the scandal with Team Canada, the legal issues, it would have been a no-brainer to qualify him. You might have had a tricky arbitration case this offseason, but he would have been qualified. Now it's a situation where, from a practical standpoint, it's now been half a season since he's played. Even if the legal process were to play through where he were to be exonerated ultimately, you're still talking about another year down the road. You're talking about a year and a half away from the game, and then all the baggage that comes with it, all the PR aspect. And listen, I'm not even assuming that he would be cleared. I mean, there's reasons why this is going to trial. So there's a lot, there's a lot hanging over. There'll be a lot hanging over throughout, and also considering the whole situation and the fact that he wouldn't be signed, what would prevent them from making and say, you know what, he ought to accept this qualifying offer. Whether suspended from the league or not, because he's not going to get an offer otherwise.
Yeah.
This would have been so from a financial standpoint, from a public relations standpoint, from a practical standpoint, it is not a surprising place that this has ended up. It's very disappointing. Especially having, I don't say we knew the person great, but knowing him a little bit, right, in the context of dealing with him, seeing how his career had come along from a great junior career to showing so much promise in the NHL to really his whole career and then life hangs in the balance now over just something that was preventable and stupid.
Yeah.
So not feeling a sympathy here. I do believe in letting the legal process play out, but from a hockey standpoint, you had to move on, and that's really where I think it ended up.
Yeah, and you want to move forward with this new goalie tandem that you have here with Sam Ersson and Ivan Fedotov. Both are starting the first year of 2-year contract. For Ersson, it's an extension, and for Fedotov, his initial deal. And then, well, kind of. And then you look at, obviously, Kolosov and some of the prospects you have, Zavragin, also Carson Bjarnason, so you have some other guys in the pipeline as well. Bill, let's get to the draft, because the Flyers caused, or Danny Briere caused, quite a stir on social media. And I always find it funny that, I'm not a draft expert. You watch a lot of this stuff, and people want to make evaluations based on mocks and best player available. And, obviously the guy that they passed on at number 12 and traded back to 13, and Boehm is a guy that was ranked high. Some mock drafts had him going as high as number 3. I believe Craig Button had him going that high. He was ultimately, I think, the 5th or 6th defenseman taken. He is undersized, and small D were not something that was drafted a whole heck of a lot in this draft. I'll give you the numbers on that in a moment. But the Flyers take Jet Lechenko, and now we have this monitoring situation of Lechenko versus Boehm for the next 5 years or so to see if what they did was right. But ultimately, a GM cannot follow, kind of the consensus. A GM, some people say, inferior GMs don't do that. They don't take the best player available. They try and outsmart themselves. I say baloney. I think it's the other way, Bill. I think GMs have conviction, instincts, and they got to follow them. Danny Briere obviously had eyes on this player quite a bit. He's the youngest player in the draft. It's still 17 years of age. They take Lechenko, and as you had a chance to kind of ruminate on it now over a couple of days, what are your thoughts on how this played out?
Well, there was a lot of, at least you talk to scouts, there was a lot of buzz that Lechenko was going to end up going in the top 20. When I did the mock draft for the Flyers website, I had him at 20th at the Islanders, and I pegged him there because I thought, boy, this is a Lou Lamoriello kind of player. Just the compete level, self-motivated, two-way guy, the kind of guy that Lou doesn't need much convincing from his scouts. Yeah, I like this kid. That's why I had him.
Yep.
Yeah, easy sell. And Lou was not the easiest guy to sell to. I would suspect that if he got the 20th, that's probably where they would have ended up going. There's not a big leap from 13th to 20th. Now, I went with Hellenius in my mock to the Flyers at 12. Honestly, because I saw him play more. He's been a big name on the draft horizon for a while, whereas Lechenko kind of came along as the season went along. My exposure to watching him was primarily in the Guelph against Sault Ste. Marie playoff series. And it's funny because that series was a 4-0 sweep for the Greyhounds, and they outscored Guelph 18-9. So you would think, boy, this is a walkover, and it was. But sometimes when you have a series that's lopsided and one guy actually stands out as a bright side on the other side, that can actually be, boy, this guy didn't quit, kept fighting, and he was actually pretty effective. I mean, the rest of his team wasn't, but he was. So that was impressive because, Guelph was really kind of an also-ran team, so I didn't watch a lot of them this year. And of course, watch the under-18 Worlds, and there's plenty of TV for that. And actually, for this draft as a whole, watching the under-18 Worlds, you got a pretty good look at 4 different guys the Flyers drafted. And that's often the case it's why it's a good tournament to watch, even if you don't watch the season as a whole, because a lot of these names are going to pop up in different rounds in the NHL draft, and you have a little conception firsthand of what some of these guys play like. Luchenko, I think the scouting reports are accurate. He can fly. He's a great, tremendous skater. Very, very good playmaker. Sees the ice really well, distributes well. He's not afraid to take a hit to make a play. He competes. He plays both sides of the puck. I think there was some long-term leadership potential. One thing that maybe knocked him down a little bit in some ratings were because he came on so much as the season went along, and he's not a guy who was hyped coming into the season, like an Yzerman was or a Hellenius was, even a Buium was. I mean, Buium won the national championship with Denver, and he won the World Juniors with Team USA, and had a very good year. You're right that the NHL teams kind of steered away from drafting smaller defensemen. I do think that the fact that Danny Briere mentioned that you have some smaller offensive-minded defensemen already in the NHL, Jamie Drysdale, Cam York's a two-way guy, but those guys got to develop along offensive lines. You have Emile Andre in the AHL. So if otherwise the players were about comparably rated, the thinness the Flyers have at center really kind of tipped the scales where they're close. You go with the forward. I do think that's what it came down to. I can't speak to the fact, as to who Williams' agent or advisor is. I don't know how much that played, if anything. I mean, I know that came out in recent days. I don't have anything to add to that. I don't know what extent that's true or not true. But I do think that the Flyers were prioritizing a center if it was close. And, I mean, Luchenko and Hellenius are relatively close. Even if you pick a guy 13th or 20th, it's not really a big jump. You're not talking about a guy jumping up 20 spots where he's projected going at the end of the round, and all of a sudden he's top 5 or 6. And incidentally, sometimes even that can work out. Peter Forsberg being the ultimate example of a guy who was projected to go at the end of the first, went top 6 because you had to include, and sometimes it doesn't work out. Sometimes you strike out, right? Sometimes you have just a feeling on a player, and that feeling doesn't play out. That was a Jay O'Brien example where he tore up the prep league in New England, and same league, same school even. That Jeremy Roenick and Tony Amonte had played for, and Tony was actually coaching Jay at the time, and said he reminds me of me at the same age. And there were there were teams, not just the Flyers, that bought into that. Now, if you're right, and all of a sudden that's what you're finding is a future 40 goal scorer, blah blah blah, just after the first half, then you look great, right? If you strike out on it, you look terrible, and sometimes that's going to happen. Sometimes if you want to take that bold swing, the scout steps up on a guy, sometimes you're going to be wrong, and that's how it goes in the draft. We talked about the other day about Cal McCarr was a junior A defenseman, and there's risk. There's real risk taking a junior A defenseman, and he was college bound, which is why he was junior A. But taking a guy who's only really had junior A exposure so far, taking him in the top 4 of a draft, there's real risk in that because you don't know how he's going to look at college. You certainly don't know how he's going to look as a pro. Well, they hit a home run. They were totally right. It looks great.
Yeah, Joe Sakic didn't go with consensus. He stuck his cheese out there.
And that's that's another example, right?
Yep. Steve Yzerman did it with Moritz Seider.
Right. And you do that and you have the right feeling. My feeling is if you feel strongly enough about that and you have the people you trust go, I think this kid can make it. I think you take the bold step, show the guts, and you step up and you make the pick. Realizing that sometimes it's going to blow up with you. Again, O'Brien being an example where it just didn't work out.
Well, I mean, the other part of it too, Bill, you can't measure is how these kids interview, and I don't know how William interviewed. I have no clue. I imagine Luchenko interviewed good for the Flyers at least. They picked him. And then the other part of the equation is the performance at the Combine, and Luchenko had an absolutely monster Combine. He was at the top or top 3 in every category when it came to skating and bursts and stuff.
Yeah, when you see some of those, maybe I'll post it, when you see some of those anonymous scouting polls, Actually, Luchenko finished pretty highly in a lot of areas: skating, playmaking,
Mm-hmm.
defensive awareness, hockey smarts, right? And what were the drawbacks? The drawbacks were largely his step up was from January on as his role grew. So it's a smaller sampling, not fewer viewings because this is the second year, but really a bigger role as he went along on a not great team. So a lot of the games they were playing weren't as meaningful. They weren't expected to do anything in the playoffs, and they made the playoffs, but again they got knocked out very quickly in 4 straight. Um, but he played well for Canada in the under 18s. I mean, it's there is a little bit of a leap of faith. He's a much better playmaker than goal scorer, which is okay. Yeah. You need playmaker, especially centers. I don't have an issue with that. And if all he becomes offensively is a really good playmaker and a moderate goal scorer, well, help guys in his line potentially be better. And we'll see. As you mentioned, like as a 17-year-old, and he'll be 17 till late this summer. Only if he'd been more 3 weeks later, he wouldn't have even been eligible for this draft. He would have been next.
He'd have been next year's draft.
So, one of the youngest players in his class. Is there some leap of faith? Is there a little bit of risk? There is. No question. Anytime you're banking on somebody's development, when scouts look at the so-called 4 S's, which is size, speed, skill, and sense, meaning hockey sense. Those are the 4 things. If you have all 4 of them, you're a top 10 pick, top 5 pick. He has 3 of the 4. All he doesn't have is the size. His average size. There's no reason and I don't mean how his career is going to go, but I mean in terms of his physical development, he's about the same size at 17 that Mike Richards was, that Peter Forsberg was, and size didn't end up being a factor for either guy. They ended up average size, doing so many other things well, you never worried about it. So, he's not going to be huge. He's not going to be a Kane Lindstrom where he's a physical monster, but he'll be big enough to compete where he's not too undersized to worry about it. So there's a lot to like. There's a lot of pieces to fill in. He's not going to be a fast track guy. I would assume he played both years in junior hockey, and then you see, right? Maybe a little bit of time in the American League. Maybe not. Maybe he'll be ready. The Flyers have had
Konechny played out his junior years and then came to the NHL.
Right. That's what I was going to say. Konechny played 1 more junior year and jumped to the NHL. Yep. Farabee played 1 collegiate season, jumped to the NHL. You'll see what kind of steps he takes in the next year or two. Hopefully, he takes a big jump in his plus 1 draft year, which is like where, for example, Frost went. Frost was basically a point-a-game player, a second, third-line guy in his draft year. And the next year, he was second in the OHL in scoring. I don't think there's any reason, why Luchenko cannot take a jump like that this year. Although hopefully Guelph gets better. He needs some better talent around him too. But so that's really kind of the thought process behind the pick. And then you see how the pieces fall in place. To me, last thing, it's not Boehm who he's going to be compared to. That's comparing a center to a defenseman. It's apples to oranges.
Yep. It's like Cam York and Cole Caulfield.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And
it's like apples to tennis rackets.
Exactly. And even now, I don't think it's a fair comparison. And you could say this past year, well, York took a bigger jump the past year or so than Caulfield took. I don't think it's really fair to compare the two.
No.
But you compare apples to apples. Right now, the comparison is Hellenius and Luchenko. They passed Hellenius twice. So that's the guy, to me, I'm really interested to track as to where he goes next. And with the caveat being that even if he's NHL ready sooner, we'll see in maybe 3 years. 3 years where he is, where Luchenko is, and that will give you at least the inklings of a sense of, should you have passed on the other guy twice? And we'll know. We'll know better then. That'd be a much fairer assessment.
So, Bill, that was pick number 1 in the first round. Flyers did have another pick in the first round, 32nd overall, as part of that Claude Giroux trade with Owen Tippett in Florida. Florida wins the Cup. It's the last pick, but the Flyers opt to trade the pick. And to me, this is really interesting because this draft is not known as a great draft. Next year's is targeted to be a much better and deeper draft. And now all of a sudden, because you trade that 32nd pick this year, you end up with 3 first-round picks in the better draft in 2025. You also have 3 second-round picks. And some of those second-round picks, Columbus, who opted to keep their second-round pick and make the selection this year, could be a very high second-round pick. Yep. Also, Anaheim's second-round pick and the Flyers' own second-round pick. I mean, they could have, when you look at Colorado, Edmonton, their own first, and then those 3 picks in the second round, the Flyers can maybe in some ways control the board next year with the amount of, the currency they have in the first 2 rounds.
Yeah, and it's almost certain, just by the odds of a Stanley Cup, because this pick was 32nd, final pick in the first round, belonging to Florida. Florida would have to win the Cup again for that to be the 32nd pick.
Yeah.
So it's probably going to fall. The odds are it's going to fall higher. It's going to be an earlier pick. The only way it defers to 2026, basically, this year nobody moved. This year, the bottom of the standings were also the draft order. But if the Florida pick by the Edmonton's pick, but if Florida were to win the Cup again, then it'd be 32nd. But otherwise, unless it falls in the top 12 of the draft after the lottery, then the Flyers get that pick. They get Colorado's pick and they have their own pick. That's a lot of draft capital. And you never know when someone's going to have an off year. But just the odds are it won't be the 32nd pick. Just the odds favorite being an earlier pick. Even the 24th, 25th pick. You're jumping up 7 spots in a deeper draft. So the move made some sense. I mean, you pick up a 3rd round pick that they ended up turning back around.
Yeah, to move up to 51.
They got an 2nd round pick this year.
Yeah.
So, the Flyers really have a very good chance next year going into the draft, and the top 40 or so picks, they could have 6 picks in the top 40. Yeah. And that's some real draft capital where you can put something together to be able to move up if there's somebody you really like. And next year is, and you never know a year out. Everything is going to change between now and the World Juniors and the final draft. But just on the surface of it, a year out, next year seems considerably better and deeper than this year's draft. At first blush, this looks like a very average kind of a draft. Next year's looks like an above average draft. So,
Bill, this is currency for a hockey trade, though, too, because we know 100%. That GMs like to collect them like gold bullion.
You have all those assets that you can move in a hockey trade. There's so many ways you can go, between now and then. And I would assume the odds are pretty good that they don't keep all 6 of those picks. Yeah. My sense is that a few of them will end up being part of a deal, whether that's ultimately a deal to move up, next year, where if there's somebody they really like, if they really say that this guy is a franchise player, that's where you start packaging multiple first rounders. The Flyers had the opportunity this year, allegedly, to be able to package a roster player and 3 first rounders, which is one hell of a hefty price. It's a lot of assets to be able to move up in the top 4. I know people are saying, well, they should have done it. Well,
that's not really the notion of a rebuild right now.
That's not a rebuild, and it's become, the Flyers aren't rebuilding. I said, well, actually, you traded Walker to be able to get an extra first round pick. You kind of lessen your playoff chances this year, to be able to get another first round pick. To build up all via trades, right? All via trades, other than their own picks. Enough draft capital to have 6 picks in the first round and a half, round and a quarter even next year. That's exactly what a rebuild is. That's where you're focusing on building assets up, and then making moves. And it doesn't always mean you do it immediately. It doesn't always mean you blow all the bullets on an immediate move up. And then you go from last year's draft, which is really. And I don't know. I don't know what last year's draft class is going to be because you assess year to year. So far, I think 2023 is looking pretty damn good.
Yeah,
right?
Bonk had
And
a
that's
great
it.
year, and obviously Mishkov.
Michkov, right, and Bonk and Barkey and Zavragan. Look at his,
Yeah,
putting in goals against in a pro league under one for a lot of that time. Um, Cotter Southern, who Cotter Southern he wouldn't be a late round pick. He'd be at least a mid round, maybe even as high as third if you redo last year's draft. Now, I don't know what the next year or two is going to hold, but when you look at that year to year progress, that's a really good year from that draft class. So it's not going to pay it's not going to pay any kind of dividends right away, but when you take it out another year, 2 years, 3 years, hopefully you yield some of that. There's no guarantees. Again, we talked on the when we were doing the draft podcast. The Flyers at one point in the Hockey News Future Watch issue, which is a poll of scouting directors, Flyers were number 2 1 year and number 1 year. And for a large part, a lot of these guys, the majority didn't pan out. That's how it goes sometimes. But it wasn't that everybody said, the Flyers they can't draft. It's just these guys didn't work out. They all developmentally or injuries or whatever either fell by the wayside or came to the NHL and have thus far fallen short of a star level. That's how it goes sometimes. But in terms of starting from, not totally from scratch, but starting a rebuild, this is kind of what you want to do, where you want to stock up on assets. You want to start with a good draft class, and you want to start to establish an identity for the big team as you begin to transition the roster, how you want the team to play, and what mold you want players coming up to fit in. Will it work? I don't know. What will the timetable be? I don't know yet. But in terms of it not being a rebuild, that's flat out not true. We'll just these are the steps you take, and hopefully they pan out in the years to come. I guess.
Bill, speaking of a mold, one of the molds that the Flyers were looking to add in this draft, and they certainly did, is size.
Yeah.
They move back into that second round and 51st overall. They take Jack Berglund, the center, 6'4", 210 pounds. He's a big kid. And then you look at, right the next pick, 59th overall, Spencer Gill. You're looking at a 6'4", right-handed defenseman. Size obviously was something they wanted to add to their lineup. They need more of it. They are a small-ish team. You have some bigger guys and guys that play a little bit bigger than they are. But you do need size. This is something I asked Danny Briere about. I think in the last conversation that we had for Flyers Daily before the draft, about building a team for a regular season or building a team that is a team built for the playoffs. And you still see teams that are built for the playoffs. They do have size, a lot of accountability on the ice, and yet not just on the back end. You have to have some size up front as well. And the Flyers addressing that, because you do look like, you look at Konechny, you look at Farabee's not the biggest guy. You look at, obviously, Konechny and Mishkov's not very big. So you got to add some size, and that's something they addressed in this draft.
For sure. And from a depth standpoint, also the big Finnish center, they took Heikki Ruohonen, who they took in the fourth round. So they've added a lot of big frame guys. And this draft this year, I wouldn't say you were back to 1996 where, small guys need not apply, but definitely bigger guys got some preference this year in how teams drafted. The word that Briere has used, and is also reflects my own belief, is diversity on the roster. You can have some smaller players. Look at Danny himself.
Yeah.
Right? Danny was a playoff assassin, but he was the smallest guy on the ice. You can win with some smaller guys, but you need a mixture. You need bigger guys. You need fast guys. You need power guys. You need physical guys. You need finesse guys. You need puck movers. You need a shutdown guy. You need guys who
you need
a variety, and obviously the goaltending piece too, right? But you need guys who do a variety of things well, who come from a variety of profiles, fit in different roles, and that's also sometimes how you become bigger than the sum of the parts. The Flyers have drafted a lot of pretty good players who are on the smaller side, so they tried to balance that a little bit. And Luchenko's another one, not a big guy. Again, he'll be, I think, kind of average size, but ultimately, you're going to look for the best available player. And then later on, after the first round, that's where you look a little more positionally. You look for certain types of players. Flyers had the big, power forward this year, Powell, who went undrafted last year. This year, he had a huge year in the USA. They led the league in scoring. He'll head to Ohio State next year, and a guy you really root for. You hope that hope he's a late bloomer. Wayne Simmons was the guy who passed through the draft his first year untaken, and then second round is next year, and really till the end of his career, never played in the minor leagues. You just don't know. But anyway, you're filling some needs. The Flyers don't really have that power forward type, and so they added a little bit in the draft. They added a small Russian forward who's very good at beating guys in the rush. Has a lot to learn. He's one of the late round flyers you take on a guy. Sometimes it works, right? Sometimes it doesn't. But by the point they picked him, it was a low risk pick in a relatively shallow draft. So the Flyers didn't only draft one kind of player. This year, it was forward heavy, right? Of the 7 draft picks, I think 5 were forwards and 2 were defensemen. But some years it kind of works out that way. But I do think they widened out the prospect pool a little bit. Hopefully, some of these guys work out, and that's really what you want to have when you're beyond the first round. You really want to look for guys who bring certain assets, and maybe they only have 1 or 2 outstanding assets. That's why they're not taken higher in the draft. But sometimes those pieces work out for you. So it's way too soon to say what the Flyers are going to get from this draft. But what I want to see in a given year is I want to see a thought process from pick to pick to pick, and not flying by the seat of your pants. And it seemed like at least there was a logic that flowed through the picks to through the mid rounds and later rounds. These are guys who you're figuring will slow cook. Like they took a player from Shattuck St. Mary, defenseman. Yep. Later on. He's going to play BCHL. He's going to play collegiate hockey. So you're talking about a guy who's 5 years down the line.
Yeah.
You're really letting him slow cook, and maybe you have something in a number of years. So that's kind of how it goes with the draft, particularly a shallower one. And so is there any immediate impact in the organization? No. I think when you look around this draft, there aren't going to be too many guys that are contributing very quickly in the NHL. And if you look at an average ordinary draft year, out of the 200 and something picks, 250 or so, by the time you're all done, maybe 100 play more than about 200 games in the NHL, and maybe 120 play it all in the NHL. So that's still a minority of the picks. So hopefully you did your homework. Hopefully you get a little lucky in the development side, and in the meantime, you just keep on keeping on. The big thing on the horizon, of course, is Michkov coming.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, too, I think we look at the NFL draft and we see NFL or collegiate players in football play, every Saturday or whatever day of the week college football's on. It's always on. The big programs out of Oklahoma or the SEC or the ACC, what a Big Ten, right? And we see those guys drafted, but you got to realize that those are already men at that point. Yeah. They're not 17, 18 years old. I say it all the time. The draft picks, when I see them later today, as I'm going to be taping interviews with all the prospects, draft picks, and everybody else, is a lot of these kids aren't shaving. They are not shaving yet. And go back and look at current players in their development camp years. Yeah.
And look at those old photos. They look like babies. They look like they basically are. They're teenagers still. They're not done growing. They're not done emotionally mature, not physically mature in a lot of cases. It's the inexact science of drafting 17 and 18-year-olds.
Yeah. Back
when the NHL draft years ago, it was 20-year-olds. And even then, of course, there were surprises. But even then, back then, drafting 20-year-olds, it was a little bit more reliable as to what a guy was going to look like in a year or two. Because each year of development reduces the guesswork a little bit. These are kids. So.
Yeah, the thing about it too, the draft is that kind of crapshoot, and to me, there was only really one player in this draft that was a sure thing, and that was the number one overall pick.
Yeah.
Beyond that, there's been number one overall picks that Nail Yakupov, for example, is a guy that didn't pan out. Played a lot of games, got a lot of leeway because he was the number one overall pick. But we'll see where it all goes. Bill, as we are now in free agency, one thing that I think we do need to look out for, I know Danny had said that the team wasn't going to make a big splash in free agency, but is the thing that they're looking for somebody to help transition Ivan Fedotov and Matvei Michkov, a countryman, to help them along here and assimilate to North America? Is that what we could be looking for in free agency? Find a Russian player to help those two in particular?
That may be a piece of it. Honestly, at least among the younger players, Zamula. Because Igor had been through that transition. I mean, Igor came here, it was a while till he was doing English interviews, right? A couple of years. And now you see his personalities come out.
Yeah.
He's completely comfortable here. He fits in with all the guys, right? He's very personable. That's a guy who could kind of take some guys under his wing and would want to do that. But if he
talked about the effect that Nisimov had on him.
I was going to say right.
Yeah.
And Nisimov type of which he tries to follow that mold. It would be great if there was a Nisimov type who's been in the NHL, is comfortable with playing that mentor kind of a role where his first and only priority is not okay. Am I on the team? How much ice time am I getting? I think that would help. That would help. That help Kolosov with the Phantoms. I think it could help the two guys coming in here. I think that certainly is a piece of it. Also, I'm curious with some of these guys that are being turned loose. You're not claiming them on waivers, but when they hit free agency, if a name or two sits around for a while and a guy's willing to take a 1-year deal because they're still getting paid on, basically after clearing waivers, right? So I don't know. Maybe there might be a guy you might be able to pick up on a 1-year deal who you weren't counting on that fits within a budget and it still fits within your timetable because you're not locking him up long term. I don't think this year is
one of those guys that didn't get tendered.
Stina's a great example, right? Not that I think Boquist is going to the Flyers, but that's another guy with first-round pick, reasonably young.
Yeah,
that's maybe about what you look for.
Was he an 8th overall pick, Bill?
He was, yeah. That was a high pick, and he's still what, 23, 24?
Yeah,
he's still
23 years old. Yeah.
So, those are what you look for sometimes, and it's nothing venture, nothing lost if they're signing a long-term deal or rather a short-term deal for 1 year, not a lot of money, on a prove-it deal, and if it works, well, they might head elsewhere next offseason, but they helped you along, for that year while you're getting into that next stage. I don't think this year is as much about backfilling. I don't think there's going to be as many departures unless you can make some hockey trades. So I don't think this year is really the year you look for the Hathaways or the Palings.
Yeah, I agree.
I do think they will look for some two-way contracts to help the Phantoms and maybe be some depth to call up, but guys maybe not being penciled in for the NHL lineup. But I sort of looking for some trades and seeing what bargains might be out there. Danny Briere has been saying for a long time they're going to be pretty quiet in free agency. So unless there's a big hockey trade to make, and I don't think they're giving up on that yet, I think they'll keep batting that around and see maybe can produce something. But other than that, I think it's just keep on keeping on for another year, which isn't the sexiest approach, but you're really you're really building through assets in the draft is the main strategy. But you have to get it right. Simple as that.
And they've mentioned Danny has the front office. Sometimes you're looking for those players, the change of scenery guys.
Yeah.
On a deal, a very team friendly deal, but guy needs to change the scenery, but has the skill set because he was a first round pick or whether that's Boquist or any of the guys kind of fit that mold. So We'll see if that's the answer as well. Flyers do have a lot of young players already, and got some more coming, obviously, with Mishkov as well. They didn't draft a goalie, Bill. Basically, they got pushed into drafting 2 goalies last year. I don't know that they wanted to, but when Zvragin was there in the 3rd round, they had to take him. And obviously, they took Bjarnason last year as well. So, first time they haven't taken a goalie in a while. No surprise, but because you have good goalie depth in the organization, and you don't have a ton of creases to put them in.
Goalie depth in the organization. This was an especially shallow year for goalies too.
Yeah,
most years you hear about guys that are early. I mean, there was a goalie taken the 2nd round and whatever who came over to North America this year on a bad team and saw a lot of rubber and has promise and whatnot too. But this wasn't a year where there was a Vasilevsky type or
Scarroff.
Yeah, exactly. There really was not that guy this year. So maybe there would have come a point if somebody fell in the draft. You're okay. This is a guy we're figuring going in the 3rd round. Here we are sitting in the 5th round or the 6th round, and he's still there. All right, we'll take the goalie. But it didn't present itself this year. But they still have that depth and goal in the organization. A pretty good young group coming along from the American League on down. So this was a year, if you were going to draft a goalie, this was a good year to bypass that. You just don't go too long with it, too many years.
Yeah. Well, great stuff, Bill. I mean, read Bill's work at PhiladelphiaFlyers.com, NHL.com, and HockeyBuzz.com. There's a ton of analysis up there from the draft and as things happen here over the next week with development camp, and then obviously free agency as well. Trades, this is now when teams come out of the draft. Okay, we got what we got at the draft. Okay, we got at free agency. We didn't accomplish what we wanted. This is when things start to move on the trade front to a higher degree as well. So we'll be on top of all of it here on Flyers Daily. Bill will be on PhiladelphiaFlyers.com and HockeyBuzz.com. Everybody, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. We'll be back Wednesday. We're going to be covering prospect camp. So we'll have some great interviews with Brent Flair, Riley Armstrong, and several of the drafted players and prospects. So join us on a brand new episode coming up on Wednesday right here on Flyers Daily.